Let's talk about something most people miss entirely, especially when they're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. See, when people think of someone being in love, they expect obvious signs: affection, praise, consistency, vulnerability. But with avoidance, the signs don't scream, they whisper. And one of the loudest whispers they'll ever give you is when they start micromanaging the distance. Now you're probably thinking, wait, what? Micromanaging the distance? Yes. Watch closely, because it's one of the most counterintuitive signals of love from an avoidant. Here's what happens. The avoidant pulls away, creates space, and maintains their emotional armor. That's expected. But then something starts to shift. They don't come closer, not exactly. Instead, they start monitoring you silently, subtly, watching your stories, liking your old posts at 2 a.m., texting you something that sounds casual but is strategically placed, just enough to keep a thread between you and them alive. They don't want to fall in love, but they don't want to lose you either. That limbo is in confusion. It's fear management. You see, love for an avoidant isn't about closeness. It's about control. It's about emotional survival. So when they start subtly reaching out or popping in after a long silence, it's not random, it's calculated. It's their internal push-pull system trying to regulate a very real feeling they don't know how to deal with. And here's the deeper layer. This behavior isn't about attention, it's about reassurance. They want to know you're still available without having to risk vulnerability. That's why they'll send a meme instead of a message that says, "I miss you." That's why they'll comment on something random instead of confronting the depth of what they feel. Because to an avoidant, direct expressions of love trigger a primal alarm system. They associate emotional intimacy with danger, not connection. So when they micromanage the distance, staying just close enough to feel your presence, but far enough to avoid emotional exposure, that's not indifference. That's emotional warfare inside their mind. And here's what makes it even more powerful. They're not just regulating the relationship, they're regulating you. They're studying your responses, watching how long you take to reply, noticing whether you've moved on, trying to read whether they still hold any emotional leverage. You become their obsession. But they'll never call it that. They'll tell themselves, "I'm just checking." But deep down, they're checking to see if it's safe to love you, and more importantly, if it's safe to let you love them. And here's the kicker. This type of behavior doesn't come from apathy. It comes from deep internal conflict. The avoidant is fighting a war between the part of them that longs for connection and the part of them that fears being consumed by it. So they create this strange middle ground, not too close to be vulnerable, not too far to be forgotten. And you unknowingly get trapped in that emotional middle. But I'll tell you this, if someone is putting effort into managing the distance between you, if they are making subtle, intentional efforts to maintain a connection while still acting like they're detached, that's not a coincidence. That's emotional investment wrapped in avoidance. It's a paradox. They're pushing you away to protect themselves while simultaneously pulling you closer to protect the connection. Most people misinterpret this behavior as manipulation or emotional immaturity. And sometimes, yes, it can cross that line. But more often than not, it's an undeveloped emotional language. It's someone loving you in the only way they know how, through management instead of intimacy, control instead of vulnerability. And if you don't understand that, you'll either chase harder or walk away faster, both of which confirm their fear that love either suffocates or disappears. But when you start to see the signs, when you realize their patterns aren't random, they're revealing, everything shifts. You begin to understand that love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like calculated distance. Sometimes it looks like presence without presence. And sometimes it looks like silence that's desperately hoping you'll hear it. So if you're dealing with someone avoidant and they're doing just enough to keep the line between you alive, don't dismiss it. Don't glorify it either, but recognize it for what it truly is. The only way their heart knows how to speak without breaking the rules of their defense system, and that, my friend, is where the transformation begins. Not in forcing them to change, but in recognizing the language their love speaks before it learns how to speak fluently. Because once you understand the game of distance, you'll stop mistaking silence for rejection and start hearing what their soul has been whispering all along. Let me ask you something most people never notice. Have you ever watched an avoidant start to mirror you almost unconsciously? I mean, not in the way someone copies your exact words like a parrot. I'm talking about subtle psychological synchronization. They start using your language patterns, picking up your habits, echoing your timing, even dressing more like you. And what's wild is they don't even realize they're doing it. This is one of the most underrated signs that an avoidant is falling in love. They won't tell you directly. They won't give you the I love you speech or open up in some vulnerable, emotionally expressive way. But their subconscious will betray them. The way they start to reflect your identity back at you isn't random. It's a powerful indicator that they're emotionally impacted by you deeply. You see, people with avoidant attachment aren't disconnected from emotion. They're disconnected from safety in emotion. So what happens when an avoidant starts to feel affection or desire or longing, their brain doesn't immediately say, go express this. It says, observe, absorb, protect. That protection often comes out in mirroring. They sync with your patterns because they're studying you. Not to manipulate, but to feel close without actually saying they need closeness. Mirroring becomes a form of silent intimacy, a safe kind of connection that doesn't ask for direct confrontation with their vulnerability. The form of emotional camouflage. They don't know how to say, I want to feel connected to you. But they'll start behaving like you so they can live in your emotional world without having to declare it. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Psychologically, mirroring is rooted in something called limbic resonance, the brain's way of tuning itself to people it emotionally connects with. Infants do it with their mothers. Lovers do it in moments of deep intimacy. Even animals mirror body language to show affiliation and connection. So when an avoidant starts doing this, even if it's subtle, even if they brush it off as coincidence, what you're witnessing is a glitch in their emotional defenses. Their nervous system is speaking the truth their words won't. They might start texting the same way you do. If you send emojis, they'll start doing the same. If you joke in a specific way, you'll notice they begin to reflect that tone. It's not strategy, it's bonding. And that bonding terrifies them, so they pretend it's not happening. But here's the thing, they do this because they feel safest behind the mask of reflection. If they can be like you, they can connect to you without being fully seen. And in their world, not being fully seen is how they survive emotionally. So when someone avoidant starts to mirror you, they're actually showing you something profound. You are shaping their internal world. You are leaving fingerprints on their emotional blueprint. That's not something they allow lightly. That's not something they do for just anyone. That's their version of, I feel something for you, even if the words never leave their mouth. And what's even more interesting is this. The more they mirror you, the more conflicted they become. Because on one hand, they're experiencing connection. But on the other, connection triggers their oldest fear, dependence, vulnerability, exposure. So don't be surprised if their mirroring is followed by sudden withdrawal. That's part of the pattern. They step in, emotionally, even unconsciously, and then panic at their own closeness. But that panic is proof that the connection is real. People don't fear losing what they don't care about. They don't copy what doesn't influence them. They don't imitate what doesn't impact them. Now, does that mean you should overanalyze every time someone starts liking your music or quoting your jokes? No. But when it comes to avoidance, Those who are emotionally guarded, distant, self-protective, mirroring isn't casual, it's instinctual. It's a survival behavior that only kicks in when the emotional stakes are high. And here's what I want you to take away. Love from an avoidant won't always arrive in words or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in the way they unconsciously become more like you. It shows up in the way they absorb your energy into their identity. They can't say, I love you, so their nervous system says it for them through mirroring. That's the psychology of silent attachment. That's the evidence hidden in plain sight. And if you're not aware of it, you'll miss it. You'll think they're just being casual. You'll think they're playing games. But what they're really doing is trying to love you in a language they were never taught to speak. So the next time you notice them becoming a reflection of you, don't dismiss it. Recognize it for what it is, a silent confession from a heart too scared to speak its truth. Let me break a myth wide open right now. When you pull back from an avoidant, when you finally stop texting, stop checking in, stop waiting for breadcrumbs, most people think the avoidant doesn't care. They think silence equals strength. But they're dead wrong. Because here's the truth. The moment you go quiet, the avoidant's inner world doesn't stay calm. It erupts. But they'll never show it on the outside. On the surface, it's business as usual. They're just doing their thing. But internally, they're panicking. Not because you left, but because you stopped orbiting them. And that's the emotional earthquake they weren't prepared for. The avoidants build entire emotional systems around control. Not of you, but of themselves. They need space, they need distance, and most of all, they need to feel that no one has emotional power over them. So when you were the one constantly reaching out, following up, chasing, that gave them comfort. They didn't have to deal with the risk of being abandoned because you were always the one making sure the connection stayed alive. But the moment that pattern flips, when you finally stop giving your energy, when you detach, when you go silent, it hits them like a mirror they can't look away from. Not because they suddenly realize they loved you. No, it's deeper than that. It's because they realize they were emotionally dependent on your pursuit. And they didn't even know it. And that's the ultimate paradox of the avoidant. They run from closeness, but they crave the security that comes from knowing someone won't leave. So when you finally step back, they don't lose the connection, they lose control over their emotional protection. And this is where it gets real psychological. What begins as silence from you quickly spirals into chaos inside them. Their nervous system, which was regulated by your consistency, suddenly goes off balance. They can't sleep like before. Their mind replays old conversations. They wonder if you've moved on. But most of all, they question this: why aren't you chasing anymore? And if you think that question is just curiosity, you're mistaken. That question is a threat to their emotional identity. Avoidants don't process love in the same way most people do. Their early wiring taught them that love either invades or abandons. So to survive, they choose the illusion of detachment. But the illusion only works when they believe they're the ones choosing distance. When you choose it, when you mirror their silence, when you let the rope drop, they're forced to face the very thing they've been running from, the fact that love does matter, that connection does hurt, that silence isn't just a strategy, it's a consequence. And here's the catch: they may not come running back. They might not text. They might not say a word, because ego and fear are still stronger than their capacity to express what they feel. But make no mistake, if you've ever pulled away from an avoidant and done it consistently, peacefully, without malice, they felt it. They felt it deeply, and they felt it where their words can't reach. They start to question themselves, replay moments where they pushed you away, wonder if you ever truly loved them or if you just finally woke up. That loop plays on repeat. Not out loud, but in their psychology, in their quiet moments, in the space you left behind. And you need to understand this. Your silence is not just absence. It becomes a mirror. It shows them what life looks like without your energy, without your pursuit, without your loyalty. And for someone who depended on that silently, it's not just a loss, it's a collapse of the emotional structure they thought would protect them. And yet, this is the very place where change can begin. Not guaranteed, not always visible, but for many avoidants, this internal breakdown, the one they hide, is the first crack in the wall. Because now, for the first time, they're feeling something real, not through closeness, but through the absence of it. So if you're in that space right now, if you've gone quiet and they're still pretending it doesn't matter, don't be fooled, you're not being ignored, you're being processed. You've become the echo in their mind they didn't prepare for. And that's where transformation lives. Not in the noise, but in the silence that speaks louder than words ever could. Because the moment you stopped reaching out was the moment they had to start reaching inward. Let's talk about timing. Because with avoidance, timing is never random. They don't just reach out whenever. They don't just show up in your life again out of boredom. They show up in moments of your power. Think about it. You've been silent. You pulled back. You've started to glow again. You're rebuilding your life. Maybe you just posted a picture that radiated confidence. Maybe your energy shifted, more grounded, more detached, more you. And then suddenly, there they are. A text, a hey stranger, a like on an old post, some small breadcrumb thrown into your orbit, just enough to disturb your peace. Now, at first glance, you might think it's coincidence. Maybe they were just being friendly. But here's what's really happening under the surface, something most people don't understand. Avoidants aren't emotionless. They're emotionally dysregulated, which means they feel, but they don't process. They don't know what to do with their emotions until those emotions start to feel threatened. And nothing threatens an avoidance hidden attachment more than seeing you rise without them. Your growth activates their conflict. Here's the psychology. When you're emotionally dependent on them, they felt safe. Not because they were trying to control you, but because they didn't feel vulnerable. You were predictable. You were available. That dynamic kept their emotional world protected. But the moment you stepped into your power, the moment you stopped chasing, stopped overthinking, started moving differently, they felt it, not just mentally, energetically. And suddenly they're reminded, you're not theirs. You're not obligated. You're not waiting. And that realization creates emotional urgency in their system. It creates a sense of internal threat. And not the kind that says, I need to be with them. No, that comes later if they evolve. The first kind of urgency they feel is about access. Do I still have access to her? Could I still get her attention if I wanted it? This is the subconscious driver behind why avoidants show up when you're doing well. When you're distant, powerful, healed, magnetic, they don't always realize what they're doing. But psychologically, they're trying to test your glow. They're not coming to commit. They're coming to confirm. Is she really done with me? Has she moved on? Would she still answer? Is she still under my spell? And here's what you've got to know. This moment is where you take your power back. Because if you respond to that reach out with the same old energy, the I'm so glad you messaged energy, the avoidance fear disappears. Their system calms down. They don't have to grow because they've reestablished emotional control. But if you maintain your power, if your energy remains rooted in your self-worth, something shifts inside them. Because now their old patterns aren't getting the same results. You're not the same woman they left behind. This is the moment they begin to realize the door they assumed would always be open now has a lock. And not a spiteful lock, not revenge, just boundaries, just evolution, just strength. And if they have any capacity for growth, this is when their journey begins. Not because you tried to convince them, not because you argued your value, but because you demonstrated it silently through your peace, through your power. See, avoidants don't respond to pressure, they respond to presence, your presence within yourself. And when you no longer need them, when you no longer seek validation from their inconsistent attention, they start to feel something they've worked hard to avoid their entire life, emotional exposure. That's the paradox. The moment you stop needing them is the moment they feel your value the most. The moment you step into your wholeness is the moment they start questioning their own. So don't be surprised when they show up at your strongest. That's not a sign they've changed, it's a test. And not just a test of them, a test of you. Are you still the woman they left behind? Or are you the woman who now understands her worth, can't be re-entered with a simple, hey, this is your power, not in rejection, not in revenge, but in recognizing that when they come back, they're not drawn to weakness, they're pulled by strength. They're pulled by the version of you they couldn't handle because she doesn't beg to be seen. Because when you rise in silence, they feel the gravity of your absence, but when you rise in power, they feel the weight of your presence. Let's talk about the illusion of casual. Because one of the most deceptive behaviors you'll ever encounter from an avoidant in love is their attempt to friend their way back into your life. It looks innocent on the surface. Harmless text, random memes, a comment on your post like, lol, this is so you, or even a just checking in message after weeks of silence. It feels non-committal. It feels light. But make no mistake, this is not random. This is strategy. This is how an avoidant protects their ego while trying to keep the emotional door cracked open. They won't say, I miss you. They won't say, I can't stop thinking about you. That would make them vulnerable. That would expose need. So instead, they try to casual their way back in. Because if you reject the joke, the meme, the little wave, it doesn't hurt as much. But if you respond, oh, now they know you're still emotionally available. You're still reachable. Avoidants love to watch without entering, to observe without committing. And the reason why is psychological. Their early emotional experiences taught them that vulnerability equals risk. So now, as adults, they've developed coping systems that let them touch intimacy without actually holding it. They'll flirt without confessing, check in without reconnecting, compliment you without following through. They live in the emotional gray zone where they're neither in nor out, present nor absent. Why? Because that ambiguity gives them control. It lets them taste connection without risking exposure. But here's where the game gets deeper. If you're not aware of this pattern, you'll misread these breadcrumbs as signs that they've changed, that they're coming back different, that maybe they're finally ready. But what you have to understand is this. Avoidants don't seek reconnection through direct emotional courage. They seek it through passive emotional testing. That comment on your photo, that's not just a reaction, it's a probe. That random text, that's not boredom, it's emotional data gathering. They're scanning your response, your tone, your delay, your openness. They're not just looking at what you say, they're watching how you say it. Does your response still carry warmth? Does it still hint at possibility? Do you still hold space for them, even silently? That's what they're after, not a conversation confirmation. And the irony is, they don't even do this maliciously. It's not manipulation in the traditional sense. It's emotional self-preservation. Their subconscious is saying, I want closeness, but I want safety more. And so instead of vulnerability, they choose monitoring. Instead of effort, they choose observation. And if they still feel they can have you without facing their fear, they stay exactly where they are. This is why so many people get stuck in emotional limbo with avoidance, because the avoidance behavior gives just enough hope to keep you engaged, but never enough clarity to let you rest. It becomes a cycle of emotional breadcrumbing, where your heart chases what their ego won't admit. And here's where your power comes in. When you stop engaging with the casual contact, when you stop rewarding the low effort check-ins with high value energy, they feel it. And not just in their mind, in their nervous system. Because now the emotional buffer they relied on isn't responding like before. Now they don't just lose access to your presence, they lose access to the illusion of control. That's when their system starts to panic. That's when they start to realize the person they assumed would always be emotionally available has changed, evolved, built boundaries, not because of bitterness, but because of growth. And when that happens, they're forced to confront the very thing they spent a lifetime avoiding, emotional accountability. Because casual doesn't work anymore. Breadcrumbs don't feed you anymore. They have to rise or they have to lose you completely. That's the fork in the road every avoidant eventually reaches when they're dealing with someone who refuses to be kept in limbo, someone who's awakened to their worth, someone who doesn't take vague gestures as signs of real change. So the next time you get that random message, that sudden, like that "how have you been" text, pause. Don't just react emotionally. Read between the lines. Ask yourself, is this contact or connection? Is this vulnerability or avoidance in disguise? Because how you respond determines what they learn. If you keep responding with the same energy, you teach them nothing needs to change. But if you pause, observe, and act with clarity instead of emotion, you become the one thing their emotional defenses can't ignore, a reflection of truth. Because eventually even avoidants have to learn, if they keep reaching out casually, they'll keep losing people permanently. You ever notice how an avoidant will say something vulnerable just once and then act like it never happened? They'll open up about something from their childhood, mention a wound they've never told anyone, say something that makes your heart pause, and then the next day, it's like it never happened. Back to being cool, detached, emotionally flat. But here's the truth most people never realize. Those accidental slips, those emotional leaks are the real story. Those are the moments the avoidant says without saying, "I'm feeling something, and I don't know how to hold it." Avoidants don't fall in love logically. They fall in love leaking through cracks in their armor, through moments that sneak past the guard dogs of their own ego. And those moments are never planned. They happen when they're caught off guard, when the defenses drop, even for a second, and the truth slips through. They might mention how lonely they've been, how they still think about what could have been, or even drop a line like, "I've never told anyone this before." That's not just a random overshare, that's emotional overflow. That's love slipping out through a hole in their emotional dam before they can patch it up. See, psychologically, avoidants are not emotionless. They're overwhelmed by emotion. They've built a fortress around their feelings because those feelings once left them exposed, rejected, abandoned, or engulfed. So now, instead of living in their emotions, they compartmentalize them, lock them away. They treat vulnerability like a ticking time bomb, one they'll do anything to keep hidden. But love, real love, it pushes past all of that. That's why when an avoidant starts to feel deeply, they don't confess it, they leak it. It spills out in half-finished thoughts, in weirdly timed compliments, and sudden eye contact that lingers too long. And then, boom, they retreat. Backpedal, act cold, because what just happened scares the hell out of them. You might be tempted to think they're playing games, that they're being inconsistent on purpose. But what you're witnessing isn't manipulation. It's an emotional short circuit. It's the nervous system panicking after revealing something it's been trained to suppress. And here's where the philosophical depth comes in. There's a universal principle at play here. What the heart cannot express directly, it will express indirectly. That's true across trauma, across time, across all forms of relationship dynamics. When something is too powerful to say out loud, the body speaks it. The behavior speaks it. The silence between words becomes louder than the words themselves. So when they leak emotion, pay attention. When they say something too vulnerable and then pull back like it never happened, don't just focus on the retreat. focus on the moment before it, because in that moment, the truth showed up.